and welcome to There's More to the Story with Amber Albee Swenson. I'm excited for you to meet and listen to Rachel Goodle today. She has been in a situation that most of us cannot say that we've been in, but yet we know that it wasn't the first time, nor will it be the last time. And so we're going to dig into her story and see how God carried her through, and also see what lessons she's learned and what things might actually be takeaways for us as well. So, Rachel, I'd like to welcome you to There's More to the Story. Thank you for being my guest today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Amber. I appreciate the opportunity to share how God has carried me through some of the most difficult times in my life. And I'm hoping to instill the same hope and support that He has given me to those who are struggling in a difficult time as well. So thank you.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. You went to school for education and you started your career at Oak Creek High School. What were you teaching?
Oak Creek High School is my second year of teaching. My
Okay.
first year of teaching, I was teaching seventh grade at East Middle School in Oak Creek.
Okay.
And then the HR manager was nice enough to move me to the high school because I told him at the end of the year, I absolutely loved the position, enjoyed working with the kids so much, but I was so excited about the idea of a more complex curriculum. The idea of teaching Shakespeare alone was enough to bring me to tears because I was just so excited about it.
So were you teaching English?
Yes, yes. So I taught English, and then my second year I moved up to sophomore and freshman English. So I got to teach both grades, and that was just such a great experience.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm an English major. I don't know if you didn't know that, but creative writing, journalism, all that stuff. So
Oh,
I'm
wonderful.
right up there with you. So literature, all the good stuff. I love it. So
Oh, absolutely. And when I went into teaching and I decided to become a teacher, it was really because I felt like God had given me two passions and two purposes. And it was because I had always been so in love with teaching and writing and, the English language. But I had also had so many experiences in high school and also in college where it felt like God was just leading me to become a teacher. Working with kids, I never felt more joyful, more purposeful, and more connected to God. So it really felt like teaching English was my calling. It was what God had created me to do. So I had just the best time working with students and supporting them and encouraging them and uplifting them, much in the same way that God does for His children.
wow, that's amazing. So what happened in December of 2022 or in January 2023 that kind of started you on this path of absolute chaos?
Yeah. So at the start of December, I was still just so thankful to God for where He had placed me. I remember at the beginning of December, just praising God and thanking Him so much for where He had placed me and the fact that I was living in the same community where I taught. So it made my commitment to supporting my students a lot easier. And the fact that anytime a student asked me to attend a sporting event, attend an extracurricular activity to support them, I was able to say yes. I know you asked about December, January. There's probably about 3 or 4 days that are super stand out on kind of where everything started to change.
Go ahead.
The first day was absolutely normal. Like I said, December 2nd of 2022 was just another day of teaching. It was another day of me praising God, praying for my students, asking that He work through me to support them and to provide them peace and to give them a sense of belonging in a classroom where a lot of students can struggle with that. And I was so grateful that I had been placed in teaching in the community in which I lived because my sister that same night had asked me to attend Les Mis, the Broadway play with her, which was so fun. And we love
Yeah.
going to Broadway plays together. But I also had a student ask me to attend a basketball game. She was a freshman and she had made the JV basketball team and she was so excited about it. I remember her giving me updates throughout the tryout process of like, oh my gosh, I think I'm going to make it. I'm so excited. And when she asked me to go, of course, I said, absolutely, I'm going to make this happen. So the fact that I was able to be close enough to my family and close enough to work that I could support my students and be there for them while also spending that quality time with my family. I remember walking back into the school before the basketball game, dressed and ready to go for Les Mis, just praising God of just for placing me where he was, for using me in the way he was, and just being so grateful to him. And when I walked through the doors that day, there was one student by himself in the school, and he came rushing up to me and he said, "Oh, Miss Goodle, I'm so glad that you're here. This is so weird. The only people here are the cleaning staff, and I don't know them. Can I please sit in your classroom?" And I was like, "Absolutely. I see an unsettled kid. Of course, I'm going to say, yes, come in to my classroom, do what you need to do, calm down." And as we walked to my classroom, he said, he was going to the basketball game as well. And, at this point, he was kind of a little ball of nerves.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Okay, I don't know how to get into the gym for the basketball game. I haven't gone to a game in the gym before. Can you show me how to get in?" So I told him I'd walk him to the game, show him how to show he was a student so he could get into the game without paying the admission cost. And once we got into my classroom, I sat down. I had enough time that I could grade some papers, which I thought was awesome, get some work done before the weekend. And he had sat in a chair. I believe he had some earbuds in or earphones and was scrolling on his phone. And then the time came for the basketball game, and I showed him how to get into the game. And once again, that uneasy student kind of came back. I showed him where the student section was, and he said, he kind of started unraveling a little bit where he was like, "Oh my gosh, this was such a bad idea. I don't know why I came. I don't know anybody here. I don't know any of those kids. Why am I here?" And he's like, "Can I just sit next to you?" So of course I said yes, like why would I not be there to support that student? And I remember just after the basketball game going to Les Mis with my sister and just thanking God that whole evening of, "Thank you for placing me where I am. Thank you that I can support my students and spend time with my family." Like I truly thought it was exactly where I was meant to be. And all of that changed on December 16th of 2022. I was asked to go to a meeting with both of my principals. And I remember sitting down, and my ninth grade principal put some Kleenex on the table, and he kind of pushed them in the middle. And he said, "This is not going to be an easy conversation. This might be a little uncomfortable to talk about." And in that moment, my stomach just dropped. I had no idea what it was about, but it was clear that this was not just a run-of-the-mill meeting. And that conversation very quickly turned into the principals telling me there were rumors about me being in an inappropriate relationship with a student. And when those words came out of their mouths, I remember just being so confused and hardly being able to breathe or process the fact that how I had approached students, which was always with God in mind, always praying that he would work through me, praying for their good and trying to be there to support, encourage, uplift them. How any of that could be perverted into something so just absolutely disgusting. It broke my heart, and it was so confusing to me. And then I remember that conversation kind of twisted into them saying, "We believe you. We believe these rumors aren't true. We believe that you didn't do anything wrong. Let's just have a meeting. We want to understand how to kill these rumors, have them die down so you can go back to teaching." And I remember thanking God and texting my family saying, "Thank God so much for this administration," because administration backing teachers is so rare in the teaching world, especially in public schools, that I was so thankful for that moment. And although it weighed very heavily on my heart that such rumors were spreading, the fact that administration was backing me, the fact that they believed me, meant the world to me.
So did the rumors start just from people seeing you at a basketball game sitting next to the student?
Yes. And I found out later that the reason that had started is because the student sitting next to me at the basketball game, I was later very much interrogated on this in January. Everybody said, the HR manager, when he came to interrogate me, I had 2 days of interrogation with him, January 4th and 5th. And he made it seem like it was the most obvious thing in the world that him sitting next to me at the basketball game was a planned date because I had gone home after school and changed into a dress. So I was clearly getting ready for a date with the student. And just the way that he was approaching it, of everything that I wore, of my age, he pulled up different security camera clips and different pictures. And because I was smiling as I was interacting with my students, I was flirting with them, or we were in a relationship. And it was just so incredibly disgusting and so confusing, because what they were pointing to was me being so joyous and so purposeful in my work with students. But on December 16th, like I said, the principals said they supported me, and they wanted to kill the rumors. And they decided the best way to do that was to remove the student from my homeroom and tell us not to have any interactions, at least until after Christmas break. They figured, if students didn't see us interacting, if we didn't have any conversations, the high school rumor mill would move on to something different, as it, naturally does in a high school. So I left December 16th very much feeling like, although these rumors are out there, it's going to be handled. I trusted my administration to have my back in that. But it turned out that removing that student from my homeroom and telling him not to interact with me actually ended up making those rumors worse. I remember the first day he was removed from my homeroom, I overheard conversations from students in the hallways saying, "No, you don't understand. He's not allowed to talk to her, like, at all. He's removed from her homeroom." Like, I was hearing these things, and there was nothing I could say about it, because I
Right.
can't talk about student discipline. And just to have to sit with that was very difficult. But again, I just thought it was something I would have to push through, and then the rumors would die down, administration would be correct. And then on January 3rd, I got an email from the HR manager, and he said he wanted to meet to continue the investigation that the principals had started in December.
So you
And
had,
at that point, I had no idea that an investigation had even started.
right.
I was shocked
So how did you feel
because
after
they said they believed me.
how did you feel after the 2 days of interrogation? Did you feel like, okay, this is behind me, we're done, it's good?
That's a great question. So the first day of interrogation with the HR manager was January 4th. And I was nervous going into it, because the word investigation was used. Clearly, so this was something very serious if HR was getting involved. I had heard stories from my coworkers of how once that HR manager got involved, usually, like things were handled and not always in the nicest way. So I was nervous, but my experiences with him were always great. He supported me as a teacher. He thought I was great at building relationships with students. So I don't think I was as worried as I should have been. But when I walked into that room that first day on January 4th, he truly looked at me like I was the worst person on the planet, like I was less than the dirt on his shoes. And it was clear as he continued through his questioning that he had a story made up already, that he believed I was guilty. He asked me several questions, the same question several times, again and again and again. He, like I said, was pulling up those pictures, tearing me apart for my age, the fact that I changed into a dress. I remember him showing me a picture of me sitting next to the student at a basketball game. And he said, "What does that look like to you?" And I was like, "It looks like I'm at a basketball game and a student is sitting next to me." And he was like, "Really?" Because I showed this picture to several of my friends outside of the district, and they all said the same thing. They said, "This looks like a date. This is so obvious. I can't believe." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Um, so that first meeting was incredibly difficult, and it was so intense, in fact, that my principal told me after the meeting, he said, "I do not blame you if you want to take the rest of the day and go home." Up until that point in the year, I had been there for every class period. I had not missed a single day of work because I was so dedicated to being there for my students. So my first response was, "No, absolutely not. I'm going to continue on. I'm going to be here for my students. Thank you. But I'm going to continue teaching today." But the next period was lunch, and I was standing in the hallway greeting kids as I normally did. And there was just such an overwhelming sadness and confusion, that my interactions with students weren't how they usually were. And they deserved better. So I reached out to my principal and I said, "Actually, I will take you up on your offer. I'm going to go home for the rest of the day." And that night, I got an email from the HR manager allowing me to return to work the next day, which I didn't even realize was a
On the
question.
line. Yeah.
Um, and saying that he just wanted to have a quick meeting with me again after school, and then we would be done. So, I thanked God for that. We're almost done. Maybe it's just a follow up. And that second meeting on January 5th was even worse. He presented me with a list of statements that he said proved that I had lied. One of the statements was the fact that when they spoke to the student, he lied to the principals. And for some reason, I was asked to respond for that. I was asked to explain why the student would lie, and to have that and to have him just continue to pressure me and pick at me was just so difficult. But even in those meetings, I could feel God working. Yes, it was scary. Yes, I was very much being attacked. And yes, it was clear that just the worst things were being said about me and believed about me. But somehow in both of those meetings, I looked down and my hands weren't shaking and my voice was steady. And although I was filled with such panic and confusion and just disgust about these rumors and what they were implying about me, I could feel God providing the answers for me. It was like I was speaking before I even had a chance to think of the answer. And I knew that that was God getting me through. And that second meeting on January 5th actually ended with the HR manager giving me a paper of suspension. He said, "You're going to be suspended until I can investigate this further." And that was extra heartbreaking to me because that night was 8th grade open house. And I was so looking forward to inviting my 7th graders from the year before into the high school and seeing how they had grown and showing them the high school and inviting them into where they would be the next year. I was so excited for that. And I couldn't go. And I was sent home. I was fortunate enough to have a very supportive coworker in that second meeting with me. And when we got done, we sat in my classroom and I cried. And she sat with me the whole way, offered to even drive me home because she knew I was an emotional wreck. And she said at one point, halfway through that meeting, I looked at you and I was like, oh my goodness, she must be Superwoman. I don't know how she's getting through this. And 1,000% was God carrying me through.
So what happened so then you were suspended for 10 days, but you were allowed to go back and teach.
So that first day of suspension, was until further notice. I actually heard from him at the end of that day on January 6th. The HR manager called me and he said, "We're done. The investigation is over. We spoke to the parents. We spoke to the student. They both said there was no inappropriate relationship. We spoke to the cleaning crew who was there the night of the basketball game. They all said nothing inappropriate had happened. So we're done. No evidence of an inappropriate relationship." And in that moment, there was such relief.
Yes.
But that was quickly followed from him, where he told me, "However, I think it would be best if you just left. At this point, your professionalism is ruined, and it would be best if you just left. At best, we can keep you to the end of the year. If you decide to return to work, I would suggest you do so on Monday because the longer you're out, the worse the rumors will be." And he said, "If you leave now, I won't really have to write a report. But if you choose to stay, I have to write a report and I really don't want to ruin your career." And I couldn't even respond to him. I had no words for how on earth I was told that my professionalism was ruined, my career could be over, and the fact that I could only teach in that district for one more year when I had done nothing wrong and everybody involved said so.
Yeah.
There was no evidence of any inappropriate relationship, no texts, no emails, no calls. I had never met the student outside of school. And yet here he was telling me I needed to leave.
Wow, wow, wow. Okay, so what happened? So skipping ahead to May of 2023, what happened in May that changed all this? So you went back to teaching, you taught. So what happened in May that all of a sudden turned things around again?
So I did go back. I decided to go back to work. And that next few months was very difficult. In fact, when I told the HR manager that I planned on returning to work on that Monday following January 6th, he responded to me and put me on administrative leave until further notice without explanation. I was out of work until January 13th, was when he finally allowed me to return to work after a meeting on the 12th, where he took me through his 20-page report that was essentially phrased and written as, although there was no evidence of an inappropriate relationship, one can only assume.
Oh, no.
And that 20-page report was terrible. After hearing him talk me through that report that he had written based on his investigation, he then told me about my conditions to return to work, in which I could not speak to any of my coworkers about the investigation or what had happened. I obviously couldn't speak to the students about it. When I returned to work, I had to tell everybody it was just for a family emergency. And that broke my heart because I always told my students that I would never lie to them.
Right.
And in addition to that, it was determined that my teaching at this point was so terrible that I needed to be on a support plan, which made no sense to me because up until that point, my entire first year of teaching, the first semester, every observation I had was nothing but positive. Maybe a few points for growth because I was a new teacher, but nothing that ever indicated I was terrible at my job and I had no idea what I was doing. As part of that support plan, I had to do weekly observations where my principals would come in and they would, write down anything they could to make me look as terrible as possible. Any cell phone that was out, any hood that was up, absolutely anything that they could. And in addition to that, I would have to, have all my papers graded by that Friday. So, if you have 60 essays turned in, I was often up until 2 or 3 in the morning trying to meet those deadlines. So they truly were trying to push me out. They truly wanted me to leave. And it was clear that they were trying to break me into doing so.
Yep.
So that was not easy. And at one point, those observations were so bad that I was commonly getting panic attacks. And I had to survive, delve further into the Word of God, where I would start my morning with 3 different devotions, maybe do another one during prep, whatever I could to remind myself of who I was as a child of God, because what they were doing to me was not who I was. And one day in March, I had the perfect class. My principal walked in and it was my freshman class and we were doing a grammar lesson, and it was like the kind of class that teachers dream of, where everybody's paying attention. Everybody is, hands up, answering questions. Like there's nothing wrong. Like not a phone was out, not a hood was up. And I remember as the class period ended, I was like, thank you, God. I finally got a good one. There's no way that they can write that this is bad. And that principal came up to me at the end of the period. He said, "Oh, I wasn't here for the observation. I was here for something else. I'll have to come back for my observation this week."
Yep, just looking for something.
And that day was a Friday. He came back within less than the last 10 minutes of my last class of the day. And while he was in there, I had a chair fall on top of me. And it was so bad that, in a classroom of 16-year-olds, several kids asked me if I was okay. Nobody laughed. And when that happens in a classroom of 16-year-olds, it's pretty bad. And several kids, asked me if I was okay. One popped his head back in after school had ended to make sure I was okay. And I ended up with a concussion and a shoulder injury. When I reported it to the principal who was in there at the time, he said he hadn't seen anything, which was terrible. And I carried on through work with a concussion, with a shoulder injury until about March 15th. And March 15th was my last day of work. The symptoms were so bad, I couldn't remember students' names. I couldn't remember that I sent them into the hallway during work time. And they were so bad, actually, that despite several physical therapy appointments, despite several doctor visits, I was kept out of work for the rest of the school year. So in May, I didn't realize it, but in May, that student had had a fight with his ex-girlfriend. I believe it was on May 15th. And in that fight, he became extremely emotionally dysregulated, very upset, very angry. And he said some of the most vulgar things he could to her, followed with the phrase, "I never liked you anyway. That's why I cheated on you with a teacher." And that was reported by a teacher who overheard it after school. That was reported on May 17th, so 2 days later. And then the next day, the principal and the dean of students met with that student. And he said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I was angry at my girlfriend. It's not true. Nothing happened." And I didn't realize that at the time. I was at home. I was concussed. And although I was frustrated, and that time was very difficult for me because I had fought so hard to stay in the classroom and to be there for the kids. And now I was injured and I couldn't do it. It was very frustrating. But looking back now, I know that God hit me with that chair for a reason, knowing what was coming, knowing that I needed a step away from the school, and a time to get closer to him. So although I'm still suffering from that shoulder injury today, I know it was very much God doing what he needed to do to get me to take that step back so I could have a bit of rest, a bit less stress before things got worse.
Which they did, because in June you were
Absolutely.
actually detained by the police. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So June 14th, I was on my way to physical therapy. My mom was driving me. My concussion was so bad that I was told I shouldn't be driving. It wasn't safe. So June 14th, we were driving to physical therapy, and the police lights went on. And as my mom was pulling over, I remember asking her, "Did you speed? Did you pass the light?" And when her answer to both was no, it was like a wave of peace washed over me. And I remember looking straight ahead and very quietly, I said, "Mom, I think they're here for me." And she couldn't even finish telling me I was being ridiculous before the police officer was on my side of the car. And he asked for Rachel Goodle and told me, I believe the car was under investigation, and asked me to step out. And he said we were waiting for the lead investigator. And as I was standing there on the side of the road, I was just racking my brain. Like, I had no idea what this was about. The only thing that made sense was these allegations, these rumors that had been hanging over my head at this point since December of 2022. And this was June of 2023. And when the lead investigator got there, I recognized him and several other police officers who were there. I believe there were 4 cars, 5 officers, as SRO officers, officers from the school. And the lead investigator finally sort of answered my question when I asked what was going on. And he said, "We just have some questions for you about something that happened at the school." And that was the only thing in my mind that made sense. There was no proof. There was no, there were no texts, no emails, no anything. At this point, I had a contract to go back to school the next year as a teacher. So the fact that this was happening now made absolutely no sense. And I asked him, I said, "Okay, I'd be happy to answer those questions. Can I meet you? Can I meet you and we can do this?" And his face just completely changed. And he said, "If you want to make this difficult, we can put you in handcuffs right now." And I was just shocked. I was stunned. I remember just shaking as they were frisking me and putting me in the back of the police car. I wasn't able to say anything to my mom. At one point, I went to go to the car just to say something to her as we were waiting, and I was told I couldn't. And on the way to the police station in the back of the car, I remember just shaking and trying to bring myself to God and praying, "God, please give me the wisdom. Please give me the strength to handle the situation. I know that you're in control." And as I was in the back of the car, the only thing running through my mind other than my prayers was, I have fought this for so long by myself with God. And I was just tired of it. It seemed like it wasn't working. And as I was praying, as I was frustrated with this fact, it was almost as if God had silenced me. the police officer next to me was asking just casual conversation questions. And it's like I could not answer. No words could leave my lips. And when we got to the police station, and, I believe it was several minutes later, they walked into the room they had put me in. The only thing that came out of my mouth, to my surprise, was, "I want a lawyer." And, they left. And I remember being so incredibly relieved that that came out of my mouth, because I was like, awesome. Now I'm going to have some help. I'm going to have someone in my corner. And I did not realize that the lawyers don't come right away. They came back in and they said, if you want a lawyer, we're going to have to arrest you. You could be charged with sexual assault of a child. And that's where I honestly blacked out. My ears were ringing. I couldn't hear anything they were saying. And I remember just the room spinning of how could this be happening? And hours later, I was transported to Milwaukee County Jail. And I was there for 3 days and 2 nights.
So the story broke in July, and then you were formally charged in August. All of this. I mean, I saw the news stories. You were on the news. Your face was on the news. Your name was on the news. Oh, who was your support system? Were you living by yourself, or were you with your parents at this time? What was your life like?
So I was lucky enough to be living with my parents at this time, and my family was such a great support system. I mean, they were even the ones, as I was sitting in Milwaukee County Jail, waiting to understand when I would be released. The few phone calls that I got with them really grounded me. They would start each one with prayer. I remember my dad, the first time I called him, said, "Ask for a Bible. It's your right. You can ask for a Bible." And that was very important, because as I was in Milwaukee County Jail and talking to some of the girls in there, some of them had been there for months without a hearing, without a lawyer. And I was so scared, because I was like, I have no idea how long I'm going to be here. And that first night in jail was the hardest, because although I tried to bring myself to God without physically having his word in front of me, it was very difficult. Although there were reminders, because when I first got there and I was in holding, I was terrified, because several men in orange jumpsuits, chained at wrists, ankles, walked in. And I remember just being terrified. And as
Yeah.
I was sitting there praying to God, just trying to understand why I was there, one of them finally spoke to me, hours later after we were sitting there, and he said, "You just keep saying no." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "You've been shaking your head this entire time. I don't know what you're going through, but you just keep on saying no." And to just have God's encouragement almost through that random stranger was something just very amazing. And then once I was in booking, waiting to be booked, I remember walking into that room, and someone looked at me and someone screamed, "Oh man, she didn't do it. Let her go." And I was like, oh my goodness, like that is God reminding me who I am. And then at one point, the few women in that room were moved to a holding cell in the evening. And I remember that cell just being so small and so cramped and so tight. And it was so difficult to find peace. And I remember praying to God, like, show me that you are here. I need to feel your presence. And one of the girls in that cell said, "Do you guys mind if I pray?" And she started with, "God, I know and I thank you that where two or more gather, you are there." And I just felt his presence. So God was with me through that whole experience, and my family was very much my support system from the moment I was arrested through all of the crazy news media. And it was very difficult and very isolating during that time, but my primary support system was very much my family, and even more so God, and bringing myself to him. My church family was also such a blessing, to have them praying over me, to have them asking me how I was doing and caring about me as the person instead of this story about me, reminded me that not everybody in the community had condemned me. So just to have them as that reminder that people can still see the truth and people can still see who you are was such a blessing from God.
It's amazing to see how Man, how Satan can work through something that it just takes something so little and just blow it up and twist it and turn it and continue to unravel it in a million ways that
Yes.
you never got the chance to feel like, "Oh, okay, that's over," because it was just one more thing after one more thing. It would catch your
Hmm.
breath and then one more thing and one more thing. And it feels
Absolutely.
very much just listening to it like such spiritual warfare. It very much feels
Mhm.
like you are under attack in a major way and that you are also relying on God to get you through.
Oh, absolutely. I know on those darkest days, it was so difficult because before my trial started, I had 10 different court dates I needed to go to. And at almost every single court date, the camera was there. And after almost every single court date, my story, this lie about me was run again.
Oh,
And, like I said, when I returned to work, as a teacher back in January, before all the second part of this started, I was told I couldn't say anything to coworkers. I couldn't say anything to students. And after I was arrested, my defense team said, it would be in best interest of your case not to talk about it. So as this story was rapid fire going everywhere, everyone had something to say about it. Everyone had it replaying and replaying on the news. It was very difficult to see those lies. And when you know the truth, the holes in the story are so blaringly obvious, but nobody focused on that. It was just the lie. It was the story. It was the drama. And to have that burning through, destroying my reputation, destroying my career, destroying, everything about me, it felt like sometimes was difficult. And that's where I really had to bring myself back to God. And I would get little reminders, like I call them kind of like love letters from God, where on the darkest days, where the tears just kept flowing and I felt so purposeless and so alone and so hopeless. I would always get a card in the mail. And it would often be from either a church member of my family friend, and I would open it up and I would just start crying because it touched my soul. It would always be exactly what I needed to hear or have the exact verse that I needed with what I was struggling with that day. So that was just, it was amazing. There are so many little instances throughout this whole thing where you could just see God's hand and God's reassurance that He was there for me. And that mental warfare, that spiritual warfare that I was receiving, God's presence is enough to overcome that. And those were little reminders of that.
okay. So tell me about the trial.
The trial was so surreal in the fact that it was pushed back several times. I had been arrested on June 14th of 2023, and trial did not start until October 28th of 2024. That entire time, that news story was running. And, even on October 28th, my lawyer told me the likelihood of you going isn't as high as I'd like it to be. There are 3 cases ahead of you. But a few days before October 28th, it was truly as if, again, God just spoke to me and He gave me that peace. And although my family said, "No, you heard what your lawyer said, you're not going to go," I told them, I was like, "No, I'm going. It's going to be me this time. I know it. I feel it. It's going to be me." And it was so surreal in the fact that this had been going on for so long, and trial only ended up being 3 days. It was done by October 31st. And to have this entire thing settled in 3 days, yes, it felt great that it would be behind me, but at the same time, to have 12 strangers,
Yeah.
deciding my fate after only 3 days was scary. It was really scary. And I remember that first day, October 28th, as we were sitting in the court, waiting to determine if it would be my day to go or if I would be pushed back. We watched the 3 cases ahead of me just kind of fizzle out. Like it had to have been God's timing. God wanted me to go on October 28th. I know it, because it was so bizarre. Even the case right before me, they somehow misplaced the inmate that was supposed to go. He was transported somewhere he wasn't supposed to go. And then they were going to get him back. And the judge, just said, "Forget it. We don't have time for this. We're going to move to the next case." And I was like, okay, it has to be God. Like there's no other way that an inmate just kind of is in the wrong place.
Right.
So I had some comfort in going into that for sure. And then jury selection started immediately that day. And the jury pool walked in, and jury selection was a harder start because one of the questions was, how many of you have heard this case or are familiar with this case from the news? And several of them raised their hands, and each of them was asked, would you consider yourself biased? And if so, which side? And every single person that raised their hand said that they would be biased against me.
Yeah.
So to hear that was like, oh, geez, okay, we're very much going uphill here. And there were several teachers in that jury pool, and there were such stares of condemnation. They were death stares as, they were going through this questioning of, you could tell that in their minds, I was guilty and I should be in jail for the rest of my life, if not worse. And it was just such a difficult start. And, jury pool selection continued the next day, so October 29th. And I remember just praying to God that night, please give me the jurors that will listen to the truth, that will understand who I was and understand the truth of the matter, who will see past the story. And then trial started, and it was very intimidating to know that I would have to see former coworkers, that particular student, and administration, all testifying against me. And I didn't understand how that would work because, like I said, there was no evidence against me. It was truly just a made up story. Even in the student's testimony, that the DA led him through, it was very bizarre because, the inciting incident of everything, he said that I had unbuttoned my dress for him was the inciting incident of this inappropriate event, the thing that started everything. And everyone was so incredibly fixated on the fact that I had gone home, changed into a dress, and come back. And nobody thought to look close enough, even though the DA had a before picture, after picture of the clothes that I was wearing that day. Nobody thought to look close enough to see that there wasn't a single button on the dress. Not a single button, not a single zipper, not a clasp, not a single way to make what he said I did with the dress possible. There were so many holes in his story, and I struggled for so long trying to understand how can you prove something never happened? How do you prove a negative? It felt so overwhelming and insurmountable, and the only answer truly was God, because God framed that story in a way that the lie could very clearly be seen and proven as untrue. And just to see how that carried out was amazing, And even though it was intimidating to see everybody who was there to testify against me, like I said, God was very much there. The teachers who were called to the stand, I had no idea what they were going to say, but they told the truth. They said that student in particular had, behavioral challenges in all of his classes, which was the truth, and there was nothing condemning. There was nothing against me in that testimony.
Yeah.
And like I said, the student, yes, he told the same story that he had told to the SRO officer after being pushed into it. But you could even hear in that audio that was played in trial how that went. And it was, when he got there and spoke to the officer on May 24th, he said, I'm sorry, I was angry at my girlfriend. I said something I shouldn't have said. Nothing happened. And the officer kind of continues to push him to the point where at one point, after asking several times if he was sure nothing happened, the SRO officer in that audio says, are you sure nothing happened? If something happened, you would be the victim here. You could tell me anything at this point, and I would go to bat for you. You would get into no trouble at all. Are you sure nothing happened? And then he changes his story. And, the DA leads him through that exact same story. And, it's about the buttons on the buttonless dress. And it's about the fact that this incident happened in my classroom, which was essentially a fishbowl. I mean, you could see into it from the parking lot, from the hallway, from just outside my classroom door, from the adjoining classroom. And the fact that he said it happened there After the cleaning crew came in that day, leaving the door open made no sense. It doesn't, like, nothing in his story made sense. And the fact that God worked that story that way was great. Another person who testified, the DA had called that student's best friend to the stand. And I knew that student, and I was nervous though, because I wasn't sure what he would say. It's his best friend. I don't know how it's going to go. In fact, nobody did. He didn't talk to the police. He didn't talk to the DA beforehand. He just kind of showed up and took the stand because he was subpoenaed. And in his testimony, he said it was a normal student-teacher relationship. He said that it was normal for students to be in my classroom after school, waiting for their parents to pick them up or waiting for extracurricular activities to start. And he said he didn't get involved in the rumors because he didn't want to spread false information.
Beautiful.
And to have God work through that student, first of all, to restore my faith that I did have students who could see what I was doing. To have God work through that student and that testimony to show that despite the close bond they had, the truth still mattered to someone was just so beautiful. It was
Really
just
is.
amazing.
So the not guilty verdict came in on November 1st. Tell me about that. How did you feel when the jury came back and they said, no, this is not guilty?
Well, let me tell you, waiting for that verdict, they took a while to deliberate. They asked to listen to that audio again of the student talking to the SRO officer. And, having to go back and listen to that again, I was like, oh no, what did they hear? Do they believe his story? Do they not see that, this was something that he was kind of pushed into? Do they not see that this isn't the truth? So sitting there and waiting for them to deliberate, waiting for that verdict was something where it was very easy for Satan to take over with the doubt, with the worry. I mean, I was facing 46 years in prison, 46 years. And when you start doing the math, you realize if I go to jail for that long, I will never hug my grandparents outside of prison. I don't know if I'll be able to hug my parents outside of prison. I will never see my sister get married. I will never meet her kids. And you just start that spiral of everything you're going to miss because somebody lied about you. But the night before the trial, I was bringing myself to God, and I have an annual Bible. It's something I read every night. And the reading that night just so happened to be Lamentations 3:13 through 66, where it talks about God's faithfulness, God's mercy, how he's there for his children, and how he handles those who twist justice in the courtroom. And after I finished that reading, there was such a peace that washed over me. And as I was sitting there with my family, after we had listened to some hymns, and after I had flipped through several Bible verses, every court date, I had written down Bible verses that had spoken to me this entire time. And I would flip through those sticky notes every court date. And I was flipping through those, waiting for the verdict. And, at one point I looked over and I could tell my sister was really struggling with the idea of not seeing me potentially for 46 years outside of a cell. And I said, it was very cool is my reading the other night was this. And I read it to my family. And pretty much right when we were done reading that, my lawyer came back and said, the verdict's in. And I was just so ready to find out what it was that I followed him immediately. And I sat down in my seat and I turned around and I realized I did not hug my family. And I remember just that crashing realization of, oh my goodness, I didn't hug my family. That could have been my last opportunity to do so in 46 years, and I did not give them a hug. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say anything. I just left. And I have that regret running through my head, and the judge walks in and he says, the verdict is ready. And, my lawyer tells me, no matter what happens, don't show any emotion. It's best, just to take it. And I was like, okay. And I heard not guilty. And I collapsed. I remember sitting back down in the chair that I was in. It was like all the stress that I felt, all of the emotions that were held within me throughout the trial just came out. And I remember sobbing, just absolutely sobbing and thanking God, because it was such a relief that after almost 2 years of all of this happening, the truth was told. I remember almost crying after my attorney's closing statement, because that was the first time in 2 years that the truth was actually spoken in a public room. And now the jurors had heard that, understood that, upheld that, and knew that I was not guilty. And to have that truth finally validated after that story, those lies just ripping through me and ripping me apart for that long, was like such a relief and such just, I was so grateful to God. I cannot even explain to you just the absolute joy and freedom in that moment.
What have you done to forgive the people who let you down?
That is a really great question. And it's something that I've struggled with a lot, especially as I was going through everything. I mean, I remember praying before my trial nightly, constantly, that student would see the light, that he would change his story, that he would tell the truth again, like he had for 6 months before he changed his story. And, when I got to trial and that wasn't the case, that was very difficult for me. I hoped that if nothing else, once he heard the judge say I was facing 46 years, he would realize the seriousness of that and tell the truth.
Right.
But he didn't. And I think I've found the only way to forgive those who have truly hurt you is through prayer and through an understanding of God's character. And the fact that as a human, as a sinful human being, yes, it's easy to hold on to that hurt. It's easy to say, you have wronged me. But as you pray and as you understand how God is and who he is, it's almost like I don't have a right to hold a grudge. I mean, if you picture Jesus willingly coming down to earth, knowing every condemnation, every criticism, every ounce of pain and betrayal he was going to experience, and he still chose to do so. Having a God that's capable of such strong love, who am I to say, I can't forgive you,
What would you say to somebody who's in their own tunnel right now, in the deepest parts, like you were some of those days when before the trial, when public opinion is against you, when you've lost family or friends or your position, or, what would you say to those people who are right there in that spot right now?
To all of you who feel that way, first of all, my heart goes out to you. I've had so many days in this experience where the darkness is so thick that it's as if you can't breathe. And the pain is so great that even though emotional, it crushes your body physically. And those days are so difficult. Days when you feel like you have no purpose, where your hope is gone and you can't see a light, you can't see your life moving forward. Those are really hard days. And I pray that you choose to surround yourself with God. God is the only way out of that darkness. Focusing on God is the only way to pull yourself from the darkness that you're drowning in. He truly does love you. He wants to heal you. He wants to pick up your burden and guide you and carry you through. And it's okay to collapse in sorrow and in loss and to be weak, because God is strong and he is there to pick you up and carry you forward. Healing is not always something that comes right away, but God will grant it to you, because at the end of the day, how you view yourself and how others view you is not the important thing. What you need to remind yourself is of the truth. And the truth is that you are God's created child. You are made in his image. He loves you and he promises to work all things for good. And the more you surround yourself with Bible verses that speak to you, the more you surround yourself and remind yourself of God's little examples of love and presence, the more joyful that you'll be. So please look to God and remember that there is still light, and the truth is that you are loved and cherished.
As we draw this to a close, I like to end with a commissioning, which is giving the children of God a task and then a blessing. What task, assignment, what commissioning would you give the body of Christ after your experience?
Um, that is such a great question. And I think, there are several things that I've learned from this, and I'm going to pull from those to, create that commission. And that's that it is so important to stand in the truth. And God is the truth, and his love is the truth. It is so important to remember how God views you and the world. He does not look outwardly. He doesn't look at status or news stories. What he looks at is the heart. And as Christians, as his children, it's so important that we learn to do the same and that we mirror who he is as God, as creator, which is loving and kind, looking at the heart. And it's important to remember Jesus's lesson that we have no place to throw stones. It's so easy, I feel like, in society nowadays with the stories we see, to see a story or hear something about somebody and just immediately, instinctually condemn them. And I always think of the story of the woman caught in adultery and Jesus saying, "Let those who have never sinned cast the first stone." And I think that's so important to remember, that our place is not to judge, it's not to condemn. It is to lift those up, to encourage those, and to be a reminder of the light and love of God. So I pray that everyone listening, everyone watching, reminds themselves of God's character, that in the dark times, you remind yourself that he is the light, he is the life, and that as you run into those in dark times, you remind yourself that God is a source of love, and as his children, we are to do the same.
Rachel Goodle, thank you for coming here and being transparent with your story. Thank you for the encouragement that you give the body of Christ, and God's blessings as you move forward.
Thank you so much.